The Samsung QN900F is one of very few 8K displays in 2025, and as such, it's also one of very few displays that can show you a crystal clear 8K resolution image. Now, some people may argue that 8K is useless as there's not a lot of content that actually is 8K by default, but that depends on what you actually do. And if you're wondering, the jump from 4K to 8K is absolutely noticeable. Now, it's not quite as massive as a jump as 1080p to 4K as you might expect, but it's a level of refinement that comes with the QN900F that simply can't be achieved by any other 4K display on the market. But the question is it worth ponying up the thousands of dollars to pick up a QN900F, or should you save that money and stick with a 4K Mini LED or even OLED in 2025? Well, let's take a look and find out. So yes, the QN900F is once again a 8K Mini LED TV, which means 7680 by 4320 pixels, and the specific model we're going to be reviewing today is actually the 75-inch version, and this one comes in at $4,299.99, and that is quite a hefty price point when compared to stuff like even the Bravia 9 from Sony, which is an excellent 4K Mini LED, and even that I would consider to be pretty expensive. But with the higher 8K resolution as well as the NQ8 AI Gen 2 processor for upscaling 4K content to 8K, there is a reason for the higher price on this model. Now, it does also come with HDR10, 10 Plus, and HLG HDR support, but it does skip out on Dolby Vision, unfortunately, and also you do get warranty, but it's just 1 year for labor and parts. And if you're wondering about the connectivity, pause if you need to, but I do want to highlight that it does come with 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, which in theory should allow this TV to do 8K 120 FPS or 4K 165 FPS, and it can do that at 4K, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, it's locked to 60 Hz at 8K, even though the panel can do 8K 120, which is disappointing because that would be incredible for PC gaming if you could get 8K 120 Hz. I know I would have loved that, but what about the actual picture quality? Let's start off with the color. And look, every TV on the market today does have, at least the premium ones like this, really excellent color. And the QN900F is certainly no exception. If you're looking at bright HDR content, you are going to get those deep saturated colors at high brightness levels that can make it really pop off the screen, and it is very impressive. But when it comes to these premium TVs, often what can delineate one from another is how accurate is the picture. And if you want a TLDR summary, you can go ahead and skip to the next chapter on the timeline of this video. But for those enthusiasts out there who want to know the details, let's jump into those CalMan results. So the QN900F, when it comes to the standard SDR performance, is pretty decent out of the box. Now, my white balance was a little bit off and it does oversaturate some colors. However, this can easily be fixed in the menu, and if you want to know the best settings for this display, I'll have them linked in my Patreon in the description below. Oh, and also I do want to let you guys know that the Samsung QN900F was lent to me temporarily by Samsung, but that is not going to be changing my opinions on this display, and I will be sending it back to them. But moving on to the color accuracy in SDR, unfortunately, it is falling a little bit behind some of their competitors. I did see an average delta E of 3, which is higher than the maximum of 2 I'd like to see. Moving on to the HDR testing out of the box, this was also pretty solid, but again, my white balance was a little bit off, which again can be fixed. And in terms of the color gamut, it also is pretty good, giving you around 72% BT20 in UV terms. And then in the color accuracy, unfortunately, once again, it's a little bit below what I was expecting to see, showing some visible inaccuracies. So if you want the short version of it, the QN900F definitely looks great, and most colors should look pretty accurate to how the creator intended. However, it does fall short of some other competing models, such as ones from Sony, and when it comes to very fine details such as skin tones, you may notice a difference between some of the most dialed-in TVs that are available on the market. But to be honest with you guys, the vast majority of buyers are going to be more interested in the HDR impact. So let's talk about that next. And here, actually, this TV was surprisingly good. I mean, take a look here at the window brightness test. It's already doing pretty well. We can see here around close to 1,000 nits in a full screen window, and actually over 2,000 nits in a 10% window, 2216 to be exact, and that actually does put it as the fourth brightest TV I have ever measured. But it gets even more impressive because taking a look here at a real HDR scene, well, this is actually the brightest TV I have ever measured. The terrain came in at 577 nits, and the peak highlight was 2040 nits. That's even brighter than the Sony Bravia 9 that I reviewed not too long ago, and that was already really impressive. So in a bright room, in theory, this thing could really put out a very immersive and high contrast image that's gonna look excellent in HDR. However, that's only gonna be true if the contrast is also good. And is it? I'll tell you, compared to previous generation 8K TVs that I've had my hands on from Samsung, it's definitely a massive step up from what I've seen before. However, it is still gonna fall behind OLED pretty significantly. I mean, it does not have the per pixel local dimming that OLED has. You're gonna be talking about thousands of local dimming zones, not millions like you'd expect to see on OLED, which means yes, there can be some blooming from time to time, especially at an angle you can see blooming on this TV. It's not the most impressive blooming control I've seen on a TV, but it is also significantly better than some others that I've seen as well. It's pretty middle of the road, I'd say, when it comes to that. And when it comes to brighter scenes, it actually does a really, really good job of giving you a high contrast image. However, that high contrast, great deep looking image can only really be fully achieved in a light controlled room, which is a bit of a shame because we do gotta talk about the coating on this display. Let's get the elephant out of the room. Yes, Samsung has chosen to use a matte coating on this year's QN900F. And I'll be honest with you guys, for me personally, that's a big disappointment. Now, there's certainly gonna be those of you out there who do have really bright direct reflections that could be a problem in your specific living room or basement setup, wherever you wanna put this TV. And for those people, this might actually be a great choice for you. But I would argue, especially for me, and I think for most buyers, this is gonna end up being the wrong choice. Now, why do I say that? Well, the problem with the matte coating is that while it can reduce the distractiveness of a reflection, it comes with its downsides, and there's quite a few. First of all, that reflection, instead of being a small portion of the screen, is now gonna be diffused over a larger area. And what this means is that, well, you are gonna lose contrast in a very large area of the screen, which is unfortunately gonna make the image look significantly worse. Also, when you take a look close to the subpixels, and you don't have to do this to see it, it is obvious even from a normal viewing distance, but there is a slight blur to the image due to the fact that this is not a perfectly clear optical coating. It's just not. So you are going to unfortunately introduce a small level of haze to the image and hit that clarity, which is very bizarre of a choice for Samsung to do, considering that this is an 8K TV and the primary focus of this TV should be on maximum clarity. Something that a matte coating simply can't achieve. And then finally, just overall, even a dark room, it seems like there's just a level of depth that's missing from the image that you do get on a glossy screen. So I do feel like for most buyers, these negatives are gonna outweigh the one positive of having less distracting reflections, but you're gonna have to make that choice on your own. I just wish that Samsung would have offered this TV with the option of glossy or matte, rather than forcing us into making a choice as to either buy the TV or not based on the coating. And hopefully next year that'll change. But also the subpixel arrangement, while not a true RGB, it's more of a blue, green, red, it is going to be more clear than OLED. So again, all of these things about the TV should be focusing on clarity, but you're not getting the maximum clarity possible thanks to the matte coating. But I do want to be clear, when it comes to the clarity, even with the matte coating, this is going to be significantly more refined and clear than a 4K alternative because, well, there's just way more pixels on the screen, especially if you're viewing it from a close 60-degree field of view type of sitting distance, which would be ideal if you can, although that requires in some cases a very large TV. However, I do want to dial in on that clarity just a bit more because to give you an idea of just how clear and how refined this image can look when compared to 4K, I think you do really have to look at games because that is the best example possible. Don't get me wrong, movies and TV that is 8K native is going to look incredible, but games is where I think this really shines, just Windows use in general, because not only is everything native 8K right out of the box, no changes required, no upscaling, nothing, but games often have assets that are actually a lower resolution. So the higher and higher the resolution goes, it can actually actually make a huge improvement to stuff like aliasing or the stair-stepping effect on the edges of objects. And it just leads to an incredibly crisp and super crystal clear image, the likes of which, if you've never seen, see if you can go to a store to see it, because man, is it crazy to see games at native 8K. And boy, do I wish that this thing was able to do 120 Hz over HDMI, because that would be an incredible PC monitor. I think a lot of professionals would love to pick one up and get it calibrated to use for said professional work, because it would be absolutely astounding, not just for Windows use or gaming, but also because you can have 4 full 4K windows in each corner, and it's just a really awesome thing to see. But again, taking a look at games, another advantage to using a screen like this for gaming would be, at least on PC, we do have access to stuff like upscaling now, so you could run internally 1440p or 4K and upscale it to 8K, and it will still look better than native 4K, and you'll either be actually getting more performance if you run 1440p, or the same performance roughly, but a better image overall, which makes, I think, this, again, if it was 120 Hz, this would be such an awesome PC gaming monitor, especially if it was available at, say, 42 inches. But unfortunately, it looks like you are going to have to buy 65, 75, and 85. There's nothing smaller than that at this point in time. But Samsung, please make smaller versions of this that run at 120 or even better, 144, 165 Hz native at 8K. It can be done with display stream compression, and oh boy, would I be tempted to pick one up if you could unlock that. In fact, I think they could unlock 120 Hz via firmware update. I hope they do, but maybe not. I guess we'll find out. But enough about that. Let's move on to the motion interpolation or de-judder abilities of this TV. Because guys, I don't know about you, I know there's a lot of people out there who do not want to do any motion interpolation at all. They want to see everything as the creator intended. And hey, if you want that, you can do that, no problem. But for me, I'm someone who loves just a little bit of motion interpolation, maybe not maxed out, but enough to take 24 FPS footage up to 48 or 60 FPS, as it does give a much more clear image in motion. And that's an important part of a TV. And thankfully, I didn't run into any major issues with this TV using motion interpolation. And as you can see with this footage here, it actually does a pretty good job of smoothing out some really juddery, bad frame-paced video, giving it a much more smooth look, which will be really important if you're watching a movie with, say, slow panning footage. But now let's talk about next, the gaming performance. Now, look, I know I've been talking about gaming a lot with this TV. We got to do it a little bit more because motion performance is even more important when it comes to gaming. And here you can see, based on this image, that while the native 8K 60 Hertz is not so great, the motion performance is pretty mediocre. It does have black frame insertion or backlight strobing that allows it to give you 240 Hertz motion at, well, half the frame rate. What else is important when it comes to gaming? The latency. And here, once again, it does really well. In fact, way better than I thought it was going to. 28 milliseconds of total system latency at 4K 165 Hertz, not 8K. It's gonna be higher, but at the maximum refresh rate, that's really good. And that means this is definitely getting my seal of approval for a good gaming display if you can run it at 165 Hertz. But now let's go ahead and talk about the viewing angles and uniformity, because this is actually possibly the most important metric on a mini LED display, maybe aside from the HDR performance, because a lot of mini LEDs in the past have had some really huge issues with viewing angles. Is that the case on the QN900F? Well, not really. It actually does a pretty good job if you're looking from the left or the right. And even if you're down below the TV looking up, there's not too much color or contrast loss. There is a bit. However, if you're viewing the display above the center of the TV, oh boy, is it bad. Now, I do also want to mention that when it comes to the uniformity, like a lot of other mini LEDs, your mileage may vary pretty significantly. I mean, my panel wasn't too bad, but it did have some imperfections, but who knows? There could be panels out there with some significant issues on gray screens or vertical banding, stuff like that. It's something that I would have to test quite a few to give you an exact answer on, but expect it'll probably be worse than something like QD-OLED. Let's talk about the audio. Yes, the QN900F, like pretty much every TV as far as I'm aware, has built-in audio, and much like many TVs, it's all right. Yeah, the timbre was pretty good, I would say. The clarity was all right for built-in stuff. Nothing to write home about, but nothing too bad either. And you had okay bass for built-in. What I'm saying is, you know what, to be honest with you, for built-in audio, it's pretty good, but if you want something really great, I definitely would recommend pairing something like maybe the Sony quads. Those sound amazing with this TV if you want to get maximum immersion out of your purchase. And speaking of immersion, you know what can break my immersion is a terrible firmware that's so bad it makes me want to throw my TV out the window. Is that the case on the QN900F? No, it's not that bad. It's actually pretty decent overall. It does seem like they have improved Tizen OS quite a bit over the years. However, I do want to take some time to kind of rip into Tizen OS a little bit. Look, I know a lot of people love Tizen OS, and that's great. If you love Tizen OS, you are gonna love this TV, but I have had some issues with Tizen OS in the past, and it continues here. Now, it's nothing super major, but it just feels like Tizen tends to kind of slow down from time to time out of nowhere. It'll be working great for a while, and then all of a sudden you pull up the menu and you're waiting and waiting for it to kind of do stuff. I don't love that, and I also don't love that they pretty much forced me to sign in to use apps, which sucks. I don't want to deal with that. Please, Samsung, stop making me do that. I've had a number of TVs in the past where Samsung has updated the firmware and not in a good way. I'm looking at you, S95B. Yeah, that TV for me definitely changed pretty significantly. Again, not in a good way over the years of owning it, and I hope that does not happen again. I haven't heard anything too major like that about TVs recently, but I've had some experiences, and again, hopefully those days are behind us. But now let's talk about the QN900F overall. Do I recommend this TV? Should you be rushing out to buy one cash in hand? Well, here's what I'll say about the TV. Look, 8K is an incredible experience. And if you're after 8K, let's be honest, there's not a lot on the market, so there's not a lot of competition. And the QN900F is gonna be one of the best money can buy. But it's a lot of money. I mean, $4,300 for a 75-inch Mini LED is a lot to ask. And there's a lot of other TVs out there like the Sony Bravia 9 that are better in other areas, whether it comes to blooming control, contrast, accuracy, etc. So you really gotta want the 8K. And if you do, again, this is gonna be a great TV. If you've never seen 8K, it's like nothing else before. The level of refinement on the clarity is crazy, especially for PC gaming. But since that price is so high, and it does have some issues with the coating making contrast worse in a bright room, meaning it's probably best to have in a light controlled room, as well as maybe not as great of contrast as I was expecting. In fact, I'll throw up this chart here to give you an idea of what type of contrast you can expect in tests, although don't read into that too much because, to be honest with you, real world content is definitely a lot better than that would suggest. But let's be honest, I mean, the Bravia 9 was mogging that TV in terms of those tests, and certainly an OLED will as well. I mean, the OLEDs are infinite contrast, so you get a bright OLED, which they're getting bright these days, and it's gonna put the QN900F to shame when it comes to the micro contrast that they can show. And so for that reason, yeah, QN900F, it's a good TV. If you're looking for 8K, I can definitely recommend it. If you're gonna buy it, I'll have affiliate links in the description below. But you may want to wait to see if there's sales, as Samsung often does some pretty significant sales throughout the year. And if you're not going to want to wait for a sale, it might be worth at least waiting for other mini LEDs and OLEDs to come out this year before making your final decision. And so for that reason, you know, this is another one of those TVs where I'm kind of caught between a 6 and a 7 out of 10. I'm going to lean towards a reluctant 7 out of 10. It's pretty good. It's better than your average TV, but it's not what I would consider to be best TV of 2025 material. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, RuPro has you covered with their certified 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable, available in sizes up to 50 feet and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And now RuPro is offering a new detachable and upgradable pure fiber cable that sends the same 48 gigabits per second signal through its ultra thin and flexible housing, making it easier to route through walls. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out RuPro on Amazon today.